Afghanistan 2 times.
And what branch of the service?
Army.
And you're still in the Army?
Yes, I'm currently in the Army National Guard in Connecticut.
You're a captain at present, but I understand you're going to be promoted soon. Is that correct?
Yes. My package is down for major, and within the next couple months, we should hear back from that.
All right, so we'll assume that you're a major. Because by the time this is processed, you will be. In which general locations did you serve?
For my deployments?
And in country before you were deployed?
In the United States, when I was on active duty, I was regular Army before the National Guard, and I was stationed for a short time at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then mostly at Fort Drum, New York. And then for my deployments, I was deployed the first time and at a few different locations. I was in Salerno in Afghanistan, and then Fob Salerno, and then I was in Ghazni province, Fob Ghazni, and then we moved to Fob Meterlam, which is in Lagman province in Afghanistan. And then on the second deployment, I also was at, again, Fob Meterlam in Lagman province, which was kind of funny because on the first deployment, I had written phone numbers on the wall. And I went there 4 years later and got the same tent office. And I picked up a whiteboard, and my phone numbers that I had written were still on the wall. Weird, huh?
That's strange. Did you get a picture of that? That would have been.
No.
Alyssa, when did you enlist, and where were you living at that time?
When I enlisted, I originally enlisted in the Connecticut Guard, actually. And that was in December of 2000, coming up here on the 12-year anniversary. And I was living in Willington at that time, but with my parents at that point. I was attending college and commuting from home.
Why did you enlist?
I initially enlisted because I wanted to go to basic training. I wanted to see what it was like and see if I could do it. And then I really liked it. And then I got to my first unit in the Connecticut Guard. I really liked it. And it just kind of took off from there.
Why did you choose the Connecticut Guard?
My whole family lives in Connecticut, and I was going to school at UConn, so, the location was kind of a given. And then I've always been kind of, a tomboy or like doing physical activities and stuff. So when I first enlisted, I was a bridge crew member, and that was a job where I could do physical work. So I chose the Army kind of just because it was there was mental and physical aspects to it. I didn't really want to, at that point, be doing a desk job or anything. And I enjoyed going into the fields. I enjoy still, field drills and stuff like that, so.
Now that was before 9/11 even occurred.
It was.
So it was not a big thing for women to go into the military at that time. What did your friends and family think of your decision to join the Guard?
Well, I think some of them were surprised. And my mom, of course, she's a mom, so she was concerned. My dad, I think, was a little concerned and a little excited. But I haven't seen many people from high school now for many years, so I am interested because when I go to my reunion eventually, I think many of them will be surprised knowing the person that I was in high school and seeing what I've chosen to do with my life. I think many of them would be very surprised.
You enlisted in December of 2000. Had you already graduated from high school?
Yes, yep, I was in college. I graduated in high school in the spring of 99.
After you enlisted in the Guard, so that was, did you go to basic training right away?
No, it took a few months until I shipped to basic training, but I was doing drills with my unit, which at that point was the 250th Engineers in Connecticut. And I actually was at basic training on 9/11. So.
What was that like?
It was,
And how did you hear about it?
Yeah, I still don't think that I have the same understanding of 9/11 as other people do. Because for us, all we heard about was people got called to the back of the room if they lived near New York City or in DC, or if they had family there, they got called to the back of the room, and some of them left and never came back to training, because I'm assuming maybe their family members were involved or something. But and then that was on the actual day, and then it took another day for them to say, hey, this is what happened, explained it a little bit. But I mean, at that point in time, at basic training, you didn't get packages, they screened your letters, so there was no TV or cell phones or anything at that point in time at basic training. I think they have that now, but so my mom actually slipped a news clipping into one of the letters, so it was still flat, and I could see it though. I opened it up and got it, and I never saw the TV coverage that everyone else saw, and so it took months until I had graduated basic training, AIT, etc. And I still have maybe seen it just a few times on the anniversary when they show the clips and stuff. And I don't watch the shows on it. It's too upsetting. I don't like to watch the shows on it. So
you didn't get newspapers?
So I didn't know.
That coverage?
We were totally separated from all of that coverage, from all of it. So all we got was kind of our drill sergeant's version of what was happening. And it was, and every night they give us some updates of like, oh, we've invaded or, gone into Afghanistan at this point, or Iraq, we've gone in and, whatever, and giving us the update. We've sent troops, we're bombing cities in Afghanistan.
So there must have been a lot.
They would announce it over the loudspeaker, all motivated.
Must have been a lot of speculation between all you guys in basic of what was going on. What
basic training is like the classic rumor mill anyway. So immediately it becomes, everybody's shipping straight from here to war. We're all going to be active duty. Because at that point I was, selected to stay in the Guard, and everyone's canceled. We're all going to be active duty. So all the rumors were flying, but really everyone stayed on track. I mean, now I know how deployment cycles work. I didn't know that, of course, as a private. I was, whoa, but it did make it a little more serious. And the drill sergeants emphasized on that too. Like, guess what? You're training now for real. This is not just training to train. It's training because most of you at some point will end up probably deploying, which was a realistic perspective.
Where was your basic training?
Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
And what was that like? What kinds of things did they train you in?
I really liked it. They trained us we did a lot of road marching, weapons qualification, basic soldier skills like first aid stuff, and a lot of it was just introduction to the military, discipline, rank structure, a lot of exercises and running around and doing things to stress you out, but you got to keep in your head the whole time that they're just doing it on purpose. It's their job. And I actually had a really fun time there.
Basic was fun.
It was terrible, but it was fun because I knew that, it's not like they really hated me. So
Now, you trained with the men?
Yes, our unit, you'll probably see a pattern in the fact that I think it might be coming from my history. Like I said, I like to do physical activity and different things and tomboy, and I worked with my dad in construction all coming up through high school and the beginning of college. And I don't think that you should be limited in what you want to do because of your sex. So I chose to be a 12 Charlie bridge crew member, which was pretty much an MOS at the time dominated by men, but I was in excellent shape at that point in time, and I hung with everybody else, and our basic training was about 190 men and 8 women. That was a surprise to me because I honestly expected it to be maybe a little more proportionate, but...
Well, what was that like? Do you feel that they treated you equally?
Yes, at times yes, and at times no. I mean, at times it was the opposite. I actually remember having an incident with one of my drill sergeants towards the end of training, basic and AIT, where I felt more comfortable to be myself and mouth off a little bit and say, hey, you know, if I was a guy, you would be making me do more push-ups right now. Well, that backfired a little bit. I did a lot of push-ups for many days, but I feel like I was never treated more poorly as a female. I feel potentially they might have been easier on us at some points in time, and I never wanted that to be the case. I never wanted anyone else to be able to say, you guys had it easier. I wanted to say we had it the same as everybody else, and we still succeeded. So,
how do you think your fellow soldiers, the males, looked at you?
I think that was the first exposure there and even at the unit before I went to basic training to something that I feel very strongly about in the Army, which is that when women or even, you know, different people who are different, someone who's overweight or whatever else comes to a military unit, people are going to have their first impressions, without a doubt. But the good thing about the military is that quickly people assess your ability, competence, commitment to what you're doing, and those things matter more. So, same thing at basic training. Sure, there were a few girls who probably should have been sent home at some point. There were plenty of guys in the same boat, and those people were given a hard time by their peers, as they probably should have been. But there were, you know, a few of us females who didn't really have any issues and quickly showed that we were part of the team just like everybody else and treated very well by our peers there and the chain of command and everything. No issues at all.
How long was the basic at Fort Leonard Wood?
We did one station unit training, which is only for some certain MOSs. So it was all together, basic and AIT, and it was just short of 6 months. Not exactly. It was like the beginning of August till right before Christmas, so maybe like 5 months.
Where did you go after your basic?
I came back here to Connecticut, was in the Guard for a little while, and then I decided that I wanted to be able to have more of an influence in what happened in the organization. And I saw that a way to do that was to become an officer. So at that point, I looked into ROTC and contracted with ROTC. And that ended up happening just before I started my junior year of college. I actually did 5 years of college because of basic training, but 4.5 years of college. So I contracted right at the end of 2002, I think. Yeah. And then I did ROTC and the Guard, which was SMP program, simultaneous membership program. So I did drills and you do the ROTC training, which is, you know, part of college. You have classes and PT 3 days a week. And
so you did ROTC as part of UConn?
Yes. Yep. UConn ROTC. And then at the same time, I was SMP, which means I still did my drills with my unit, but now as a cadet, still did AT with the unit, etc. So it was time consuming, but I liked it.
What were you going to college for? What was your degree in?
Political science, so liberal arts degree.
When did you graduate from ROTC?
I graduated from ROTC and college in May 2004.
And why did you do that?
I immediately was called onto active duty because at some point right before the start of my senior year, I think it was, I decided that through the experience I had as a cadet, I wanted to be a platoon leader, unlike maybe some platoon leaders that I had and experienced during my time in the Guard. And I said, you know what, the way that I want to do that is to do it full time. I don't think I could do that job justice with doing it part-time. And people do, but I wanted to be able to do it full-time. So I revoked my Guard contract and put in an active duty contract for once I got commissioned. So then
That
as soon
was
as
your
I...
choice?
Yep. Which my parents were more upset about that than me joining the Guard, for sure.
Well, especially because then we were volunteer.
Yep. And so then I got commissioned and graduated college and went immediately on active duty, went to Fort Knox, worked there training some new cadets for a few months. Then I went to Fort Lee, Virginia, where I did my officer basic course. And then I went to Fort Drum.
What was the officer basic course?
I was a logistics officer. Quartermaster was my basic branch. So that's the officer basic course I did, quartermaster.
How long was that training?
The same, actually. It was like August to December, so it was 5 months or so. 4 months, 5 months.
What kinds of things did they teach you there?
Since I attended that course, it's kind of been overhauled, but at that point it was still like legacy Army old concepts. It wasn't really up to date for the modern deployments. So the stuff you learned, it was frustrating because the stuff you learned, you'd sit in class and they'd be like, well, we have to teach you this, but it's not how it is anymore. Well, then why are we learning it, you know? But overall, they taught us stuff about all the sections of being a quartermaster: food service, fuel, petroleum, water. We did a little bit on convoy training, but really that should have been an emphasis, which now I believe it is more of an emphasis, but at that point in time, it wasn't really part of the curriculum. General military history, military organizational chart kind of stuff. It's pretty basic stuff about.
Did you find that training as much fun as basic?
No. It was fun because it was the first time, I think it was at the point in life where, I graduated college, I was making money, I was young, I was, in the best shape of my life. It was fun, but in terms of the actual training itself, it was not as good of training as basic training, though the training wasn't as fun.
Where did you go after Fort Lee?
I went to Fort Drum. While we were at officer basic course, everyone in my whole class and another class that was there with us got the news that we had to choose Fort Campbell or Fort Drum. Everybody had all their different duty stations. Everyone's excited. I'm going here. I'm going to Germany, wherever. I was supposed to go to Fort Bragg. And they said, guess what? Next units in the rotation that we need to fill, Fort Drum, Fort Campbell, everybody choose one. That's it.
Did it depend on where you went, what you were going to be doing?
Within reason, no, because all of us were quartermaster officers, so we would put in some compatible slot with that branch. But yeah, I mean, if you went to Fort Campbell, you were going to go to air assault school and be part of the 101st Airborne. If you went to Fort Drum, you knew it was going to be cold, and you were probably going to be doing things related to snow and field training in the snow, etc.
You chose Fort Drum?
I did. I'm not a hot weather person. And also my whole family's in Connecticut, like I said before. So I knew that Fort Drum was somewhere where I could drive home to visit, which was appealing to me. And I'm more of a country kind of person, so I liked that it was in the woods, etc. So I chose Fort Drum.
How long were you stationed at Fort Drum?
Just under 4 years. And during that time, I had one of my deployments.
What were your duties at Fort Drum?
My first duties is I was assigned as GSO, General Supply Officer, in the SPO shop. The whole time, SPO, it's Support Operations, even though it doesn't make sense for the acronym, but the whole time I was assigned to 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, and at first I was under HHC because I was in the SPO shop, like I said, and then I quickly transitioned to Alpha Company. I was one of those new second lieutenants there that had learned, if you want to be a platoon leader, you got to keep asking for it. So I kept asking my boss, sir, when can I go be a platoon leader? When can I go be a platoon leader? And they moved me. They moved me to a platoon known as Liquid Lead, which was a hybrid, I think, because of the platoon sergeant, who was absolutely fabulous, one of the best people I've known in the military to date. One of my mentors, one of my heroes, great guy.
What was his name?
James Brown. Believe it or not, I guess his mom was a fan. And he's still on active duty, about to be a division sergeant major. So he, he's the real deal. So, but he was an ammo guy by trade, so they took part of a section that's normally in another platoon and moved it into the fuel and water platoon. So it became fuel, water, ammunition platoon, which was just an internal move. So we supported the 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division with fuel, ammo, and water, and had an absolutely phenomenal time there with that platoon. Great training, great, everything. Everything I could have wanted being a platoon leader to be, it was.
So you were being trained to be a platoon leader there under James Brown?
I was a platoon leader, and James Brown, on active duty, they do a very good job of how it's supposed to be set up. Is the second lieutenant is a new person, they're new, and the platoon sergeant has been around a while, and they're supposed to mentor their counterpart of second lieutenant. So I was technically the platoon leader, but he was mentoring me, and I was ready and willing to accept his mentorship. And he did teach me a lot, and about leadership, about training, about all kinds of stuff. And he took his job seriously as platoon sergeant and as mentor to his platoon leader. So through that, we were training our platoon. We took our platoon out all the time on just platoon level training lanes, where we'd be out on the ranges for 5 days at a time. And we did platoon sling load training, hot refuel training of aircraft, all kinds of stuff, because he had good connections, was very motivated. And at that point, I was super motivated to be training 24/7. So, and then we got the notice that our brigade would be deploying to Afghanistan. So it made the training even that more important.
What year was that?
We deployed in March 2006, beginning of March 2006. I think maybe the 3rd or something.
When you were platoon leader, how many men were in your platoon?
At that point, it was like 53.
How many of them were women?
I don't remember the exact number, but I would guess maybe 6.
So a small number.
Yeah. Specifically in those MOSs, because our company also had the SSA, which was the warehouse platoon, and there was a lot more women in that one. And then we had a couple of trans platoons, which they had, maybe a quarter women in those. But ours, I think just because of the ammunition MOS and the fuel and water, there weren't that many women. How
were you treated as the platoon leader? Do you think you were treated any differently because you were a woman? No.
I was treated great by my soldiers, very well by my company commander and by the battalion commander. The battalion commander is another person who I still am in touch with from active duty, who I would consider one of my mentors in the military. Very, very good guy. He had a lot of female leaders in his unit, so he was very attuned to treating people equitably and valuing performance. He was very performance oriented, so he was attuned to that and didn't discriminate in any way. It's a very diverse, in the support field, it's a very diverse group of people, race, sex, age, etc., compared to some other branches that you would see.
Before you deployed to Afghanistan, did you get any leave to go home first?
Yeah, yep. We would get block leave a couple times a year anyway. And then we had a big chunk of leave over Christmas. And then my family actually came up for a little bit right before I deployed up to Fort Drum, and then saw me off and took my vehicle and belongings back home.
So you left the United States in March of 2006?
Yeah.
How'd you get to Afghanistan?
The process to deploy was very easy on active duty. Very easy. Very, very nice. You just show up at your unit, get on a bus, drive to the airfield, and fly to Afghanistan. So,
like commercial or?
You have a contract plane. Mm-hmm.
Did you fly over with your unit?
Yep, our whole battalion, minus, there's always an advanced party and whatever, but within reason, our whole unit flew together. Whole battalion flew together.
Where did you land?
Well, the process of flowing into Afghanistan includes mostly stopping in Manis, Kyrgyzstan. That's the entry point. And then from there, you break down into smaller groups of kind of where you're going to be going in Afghanistan. So from there, we flew into Bagram, which is near Kabul, which is, again, Bagram and Kandahar are the two major entry points in the actual country, two major airfields. And then from Bagram, we flew down to Salerno. And interestingly, I guess this is important to back up a little bit, just before we deployed, maybe a month or two before we deployed, my battalion commander called a few of us into his office, and he said that he had a tasking that he was going to need to fulfill, and that they knew as part of the 3rd Brigade 10th Mountains deployment, they were going to have an additional infantry battalion. And lo and behold, it was the 102nd Infantry from Connecticut. And Connecticut's National Guard hadn't gone through transformation at that point. And what that means in this case is that the infantry battalion did not have a support company attached to it. So they did not have any organic support. So what my battalion commander had been tasked with as the senior logistics officer in the brigade was, you need to find a way to support this infantry battalion that's going to fall under us. He said, I need someone who's going to volunteer to take an element of our battalion and go support the infantry. Immediately I said, I'll do it.
Why did you volunteer?
I'll do it. Well, a number of reasons, I think. Because, number one, I was a unit from Connecticut. How could I not? I love Connecticut, right? So how could I not? Second of all, because the more I saw what my potential mission was going to be in Afghanistan, I wanted something more. I was starting to see that I was going to kind of be on the fob a lot and maybe pushing out ammo to other units. And I wanted to be more in a direct support role. I wanted to be out there on the ground directly supporting somebody. So this was a chance to do it. And it was, again, an ideal situation that I fell into by virtue of the fact that at first my battalion commander said no. And it was, he was hesitant because I was a female. Because I'm going to support these infantry guys that nobody even knows. They could be, who knows what they are, right? Connecticut Guard. Oh, they're the Guard. Has this whole thing. And I remember saying, that's BS. No way. So I waited a day. I talked to my company commander and said, can I go talk to the battalion commander? Sure. And I went back into the battalion commander's office and was like, sir, can we revisit this? I really think I'm the right person for the job. Who else are you going to use? Whatever. So I made my argument. I said, if they're a bad unit, I'll let you know right away. If I'm being mistreated, I'll let you know right away. And finally, he agreed. So I actually made contact with some members of the unit here that I found out, I called down and said, hey, I'm going to be supporting you in Afghanistan. Can we meet up? So I actually met up with a couple people at a pizza place in Tolland at one point when I was home on leave, and introduced myself and started that relationship. And then I deployed to Afghanistan. They followed on because they were going through the National Guard mobilization process. So they came maybe a month and a half later. So what I got to do is be in Salerno for a little bit. And then my battalion commander afforded me the luxury of basically hand selecting who I wanted to take with me on this mission. Because I think he recognized that it was going to be like a mini forward support company. It was going to be something where we were going to be out on the ground doing missions. And I had to have the right people for that job. So I got to hand select people I took mostly my own platoon because I knew them. I knew who they were and how they worked and their strengths and weaknesses. And then I took some soldiers from headquarters because I needed to have cooks. I took some soldiers from from trans platoons to have more truck drivers, etc. Made my little ad hoc element. I took maintenance soldiers because I needed to have a maintenance section. And there we were. We had a couple formations and said, here we are, the new forward logistics element, because at that point, that's what we were calling ourselves. And let's pack up our stuff and move out. So I had a guy from my platoon who was an E6, and he became the platoon sergeant. He was one of the subordinate NCOs to that platoon sergeant I was telling you about, Sergeant Brown. And he was selected to be the NCOIC with me. So we rounded up our folks and headed out. And
so Sergeant Brown went with you? Sergeant
Brown didn't go. He stayed and was in charge of the remainder of our platoon back at Salerno. And then, obviously, this is only one interview. There's way too many details to go over with everything. But we saw each other numerous times throughout the rest of the deployment because my other battalion's mission ended up changing 3 or 4 times, and they got all these other taskings. And so he ended up taking charge of another element that went and established a fob in the middle of nowhere. But we saw each other throughout the deployment.
So you didn't stay for your deployment at Salerno?
Nope, I left.
How long were you at Salerno?
Just about a month and a half. And then I left with the guy who ended up being my platoon sergeant was a Staff Sergeant Howard Byford.
Can you spell his last name?
Byford. And he, along with a couple other key NCOs, Sergeant Heron, Sergeant Holland, two great outstanding guys, we left and went to Ghazni. Fob Ghazni. Ghazni is in the city of Ghazni, in Ghazni province. Ghazni. Yep. And at that point in time, it's hard to have perspective now for people who have only deployed recently to Afghanistan, because at that point in time, there were very few people in Afghanistan. I believe there was something like, I can't remember if it was either 17 or 30,000. But at this point, there's more people now at Bagram Airfield than there was in the entire country during our first deployment. So everyone's area of operations was very large. The FOBs were very small, very few people. So when we started...
How big did you say Ghazni was?
I know exactly how big it was, because you could run around, if you were doing PT, on the inside of the wall, and it was exactly 1 mile. So 400, 400, 400, 400. That's it.
How many people would you say were there?
There were about 400 people there. At the beginning, it surged at various times due to operations to about 800. But at the beginning, there was 400 people there. So it was fairly, it wasn't an outpost size. That's like a platoon size place, but it was pretty small. Excuse me. So we went there, and there was a unit that the 102nd was set to replace, which was an infantry unit from Texas. And we got our bearings, did a little area orientation, did a few missions, got set up, etc. And then the word was, the infantry is arriving at Bagram. So we took our convoys, and we drove up, picked some of them up. Some of them flew down, of course, but we picked a bunch of them up and all of their equipment and everything. They brought all their baggage, so we drove up to Bagram. And at that point, it was nothing to drive from Ghazni to Bagram, which was, depending on the incidents, day, traffic, etc., could be a 5-hour drive. It could be a 15-hour drive. So, but we thought nothing on the first deployment of doing that run. Sometimes in one day, we drive up, pick up stuff, and drive back. So... we brought them in, welcomed them, and then the battalion commander for that first deployment was Colonel Gilbert, and we were attached to him, and it was a nice hybrid for me of reporting to him as the commander on the ground, and then I had meetings every day and reported every day back to my logistics, my active duty battalion commander about the status of support in the area and soldier issues and stuff, because a lot of our legal chains still went through our active duty battalion and stuff like that, awards. So we brought the 102nd in, and then we were there for a while.
How long's a while?
So we were there running missions in Ghazni area, which was extreme. It was funny because we were told when we deployed that it was a kind of a slow area, and it heated up fast. A lot of activity happened there, a lot every day, multiple missions a day, which again was a contrast to my second deployment. First one was so much busier, multiple missions a day sometimes. And we were there maybe April, we went there from Salerno for me and my folks. And then we were in Ghazni until December, at which point we moved to Medarlam. The battalion, the 102nd Infantry got a change in their mission set and went to take over Lagman province.
So the months that you were at Ghazni, you said sometimes there were multiple missions a day. Can you describe what were the missions? What kinds of things did you do on a daily basis? Well,
when I say the 102nd Infantry Battalion, it's important to remember, and I'm sure this will be probably in somebody else's interview in more detail, but it's important to remember that deployment, their mission was PRT security forces. So they were split out all over the country. And we had...
What's PRT?
Provincial Reconstruction Team. So it was often a team that was doing more of the hearts and minds kind of work in Afghanistan. And they were their security force. So platoons or sections of platoons of the 102nd were all over the place, providing security for these guys. So at our FOB and with our task force Iron Gray, we only had part of headquarters, 102nd Infantry, and then part of their mortars, I believe, section mortars and fisters, and then part of a platoon, and then we had actually a platoon from my organic active duty brigade, an infantry platoon from 287 Infantry, who fell under a 102nd commander. So there was all this interrelationship between the 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, and the 102nd, which actually was a great relationship working for them. And so it was a very small group of us. Out of the 400 on the base, maybe 100-ish were actually people who were doing missions out of the wire, not the PRT, not the medic, these medical people that were there, not contractors, not whatever else. So we were an economy of force because we were very small in numbers, and then people started taking leave, so it got even smaller. But we only had a couple elements that could roll out of the wire at any given time. So what would happen was, again, this is one of those cases where I think people have their impression of we're a support unit. We have a female in charge of us. So there were initial opinions made, we can't have them be like QRF, or we don't want to give them any dangerous missions. So that was quickly dispelled, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, because my platoon was very competent. The soldiers I had were very trained, very skilled, fabulous soldiers, could not ask for better. And because they needed us, because they were so few people, it was just a practicality of the matter that they needed us. So we ended up doing so many more missions than you would think that a support element would have done. We were backup QRF frequently.
QRF
is quick reaction force. So like if there was any attacks in the area or on the FOB or something happened out to another unit in our area, we would be the first responders to go out.
Describe in detail what something like that would be like.
Like for example, one of the missions we had as the QRF or backup QRF was a report came in. The regular QRF was out doing something. I don't know. They were on another response to some contact in some village. So a call came in to the TOC to say, hey, there's an IED or a mine that has been reported in this area around this location, and we need to go check it out. Okay, so we grab the EOD guys and the explosive ordnance disposal guys, grab them, throw them into the QRF, and we head out. And, so that's a mission that you wouldn't normally think.
How convoy would that be?
At that point in time in Afghanistan, the requirement was 3 trucks. So, and by trucks in the first deployment here, 2006, I mean Humvees. We were using Humvees then still.
Were they armored at that point?
Yes. We were not there before armor. We had what they call AOA, add-on armor, and part of my maintenance guy's job was to do this add-on armor. So we were doing add-on armors. I think we were maybe at like 5 or 6 at that point of kits that you put on. It made the trucks very heavy for what they were supposed to be. It's good now that they've moved to other kinds of vehicles because the add-on armor kits were so heavy that the trucks would be bogged down. You had to really try and figure out how much ammo and weapons and et cetera can I put in here because it was really maxing its capacity at that. But they were good trucks. Oh man, they got us to some crazy places. So they were good trucks, don't get me wrong. But and so we went out and looked for said IED, and it actually ended up being a landmine on that one, I remember. And I remember we found it because we asked some kids. We went to the exact grid square where we had been given the report that where it was, and it wasn't there. We went to the exact, 8-digit grid location. It wasn't there. We looked around. We were dismounted, fanning out, looking at the area. No one could see anything, and EOD guys couldn't see anything. So I'm like, I had a habit of asking kids for help when we were out and about because, like we talked about before, actually, most of the time they're pretty honest. They're not yet there with another agenda. So I said, hey, have you seen anything that looks like a mine? We obviously had an interpreter on every mission. Have you seen this? And they said, oh, yeah, it's right up here. So they ran off the road and showed us where it was. And it was a washed up landmine because it had rained a few days earlier. So a lot of times after the rain in that area is still an area of Afghanistan that's heavily mined from the Russians. And whether it's just a mine that's out there from the Russians still, or sometimes the enemy would take the mine and reposition it use it as an IED almost, just use it for their own purposes. But I think this one was just still there. So it washed up. The kids knew where it was. They showed us, and the EOD guys collected it, destroyed it, blew it in place, and drove on with our day. But that was, a typical thing. And then a mission that was kind of unique to us, that we were frequently called out for, was recovery missions. So part of the support platoon is that we have the wrecker. So anytime anyone in our whole, because we provided area support, which you can provide support to a specific unit in the military, or you can provide support to an area. And on both deployments, I provided support to an area. So what we would do is anytime anybody got hit with breakdown, IED, direct fire incident, anytime that they had a disabled vehicle, then we would be called out. And those were the missions that oftentimes lasted the longest, were the most frequent, a couple times in a day, etc. So there were so many of those, I can't even begin to think of one specific one. I mean, we also had to recover civilian vehicles that, if we were asked sometimes by the government, the governor, he would call in, because obviously the governor and the battalion commander have a relationship as part of what we do over there. And he'd say, the Taliban shot up this tractor trailer truck, killed the driver or whatever, but we need the tractor trailer truck to be recovered. So there we were, support platoon, go out and recover a tractor trailer truck. And it was very interesting, very, very different from the second time we deployed, in that the missions were so wide, so varied. There was much less red tape for what missions you performed, how, when, etc. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll go do that. Here we are. We go out and do it. And so...
Well, you were traveling outside your perimeter almost on a daily basis.
Yes, I would probably say at least 5 out of 7 days a week, yeah.
What did you perceive the danger level to be?
Depended where you went. In the AO, if you traveled certain directions, you knew you were going to be relatively safe. I mean, obviously it's never 100% safe, but, and then the more you got off the beaten path, because what we had is Route 1, which was one of the main arteries in Afghanistan, one of the main roads, one of the actual paved roads that runs from all the way from Kandahar through Ghazni up to Kabul and then back out to the east all the way to Pakistan. So not many IEDs, at least at that point in time, were in that road because it was, I think that they recognized that they would be angering the local people just as much as us if they blew up that main artery. So if you were traveling along that route, you were fairly safe. But if you headed south from our base, you pretty much knew that something was going to happen, whether it be direct fire incident, IED, et cetera, but heading south, there was a lot more chance of contact. And then we had an area that was quite large. I mean, you could drive, I think it was maybe, I can't remember the exact amount of area, but I believe it was about the size of maybe Massachusetts or so that we covered, a little bit bigger than that even. And so we would go out, and an interesting thing in that area too, compared to Mederlam and Lagman province, is that it was almost like a whole giant plateau area. You were at 8,000 feet there of elevation, and it was very arid with a few chances of rain or snow throughout the year, but that's it, very arid, and you could drive anywhere. So often there were all these trails and little dirt paths and whatever that we and the locals used, and only that one paved road. That's it. That was the only paved road for a long time. So what I enjoyed is you could navigate anywhere you wanted. You could make your best route to okay, so there's a unit out here with a broken down truck, and go recover them. So it was kind of like, okay, I get to make my own plan. And I enjoyed that. I got to say, all right, we can come in from the north, go back from the south so as not to use the same route, find the most efficient trails, to get out. And so I really enjoyed it. And yeah, multiple recovery missions each week. We did all the resupply. Resupply at that point, there wasn't a lot of aircraft in Afghanistan. So comparatively to what there is now. So a lot of supplies did not come via air at that point in the conflict. So we would go do runs up to Bagram probably either once a week or once every 10 days, where we would pick up repair parts, mail, various other supplies that we needed, little class 2 items like paper towels, stuff like that. Anything you needed just to resupply. Other than fuel would get delivered by local national contractors. But
now you talked about the local villagers. Did you have any interaction with the locals?
Yeah, a great deal. Not as much as some other units that maybe that was their job, but we would interact with them on nearly every mission that we went on. So,
what's your relationship?
We didn't have like a set relationship really with anyone, again, because that our job wasn't the interaction portion. It just happened to be by virtue of being out there that we would interact. But I remember a few instances of interactions. Like I remember one time, as you probably know, Afghanistan has different ethnic groups. And one of the ethnic groups is the Hazarans. And there are people that I think are they look kind of Mongolian in their appearance. They stand out because they look different and have different beliefs, etc., than a lot of the other Muslims there. And they're generally more friendly and in line with the U.S. troops. They're anti-Taliban, anti-Al-Qaeda, etc. And I remember we went out to an area just a little bit northeast of our base, and there was a group of them out there, and they were very willing and able to give you information on, oh, don't go down that road, stay out of this area. Oh, the best way for you to get back is this way. And when they were talking to you, there was no agenda. They weren't leading you down some dangerous path. They were pretty legitimate. So interacting with them was always a pleasure. And I also remember a lot of times when we would be stopped pulling security, if it was in a town, the little girls would always want us to take off our helmets so they could see our hair and see that we were girls. They would always run up. The little kids would always run up and be like pointing at my bun and pointing at my hair and pointing at me and the other female soldiers. Because I had probably 2 female soldiers who with me went out on every mission. And they always wanted us to prove that we were girls, to look at our hair. So that was cute. And the kids were always cute.
Now, you said in December you went to Metterland?
Yeah, we moved. It's M-E... I know I have to write it down. Okay, MEHTAR space LAM. I always forget where that H goes.
Metterland. Okay, now what was Metterland like and how far away was that?
Okay, so to move there, we moved the battalion in our trucks. So we actually drove there numerous times before we actually moved, because we drove there numerous times to drop stuff off, all of our equipment.
How far away was it?
Far. It was, again, depending on weather, day, incidents, etc. But on average, I would say it would take us 10 to 12 hours to get there. So what we would do is we'd have to go north up Route 1 to Kabul, and then in Kabul we would bear east and head again down. That's the point where Route 1 turned towards Pakistan, turned east and went down through this mountain pass, which was absolutely beautiful. Very dangerous road, but absolutely beautiful. Down through this mountain pass and then on into the valley. And then that mountain range is where the climate changed. Like I was saying, the other climate was plateau, arid, etc. On the other side of that, there was a significant river. And in terms of, Afghanistan, it's one of the more agriculturally viable areas of Afghanistan, in Laghman province. So there were trees a little bit. I mean, nothing, it's obviously not like here, but there were trees there and there were some farmlands, etc. And the difference there too is it was down closer to Jalalabad, Afghanistan, as their closer city. And the area had a lot more, it was an older settlement there. So there were a few more paved roads, although on that first deployment, a lot of the roads still were dirt, whereas on the second one, a lot of them were paved. But on the first deployment there, but the geography was such that when Route 1 was here and you went north off of Route 1 to go to Metterlam, to FOB Metterlam in Laghman province, and then we had 2 other FOBs that were in our AO that belonged to us or interacted with us on this first deployment, and they were up here and up here. So it was like a Y, a one road here that was paved, and at that second, on the first deployment, these 2 roads were still dirt. But you could only take those routes, which was a stark contrast to down in Ghazni, where we could, like I said, drive anywhere we wanted. Oh, I'm going to avoid this area. I know it was dangerous, etc. On this one, because of, it was much more mountainous, very rocky mountainous terrain, and these roads were cut in, and there was the only option, only way in, one way out. And I mean, you're not even in the military, and you can probably understand that that exposes you to a lot more danger. They know if you go up, you're going to come back. And there's only one way to come back. So, and if that road gets taken out, they can isolate the locations that are up here, up north. So, it was less fun in the new location, that is for sure.
Now, was Meadowland a forward operating base?
Yes, yeah.
How large was that compared to?
Small. Well, by the time we left Ghazni, it had grown. Over the course of those months, it had grown as the U.S. forces kind of expanded in that area. So by the time we left, it was up to about the 800-ish mark, 700 people. And we left and other people came to take our place there. But Meadowland was very small, maybe like 200. And size-wise, probably about the same at that point in time as Ghazni, probably just about a mile. But it was set up differently, so it's not like you could run around it and measure it like we did at the other place.
How did it compare with Salerno and life on this forward op? Because other than it's obviously huge difference in geography and size, what was life on this forward operating base like compared to Salerno?
Salerno or Ghazni?
Or Ghazni, I mean.
In Ghazni, because Salerno was huge, so Ghazni, pretty life on the base was pretty much the same. It was pretty much the same. I think in terms of living conditions, though they were pretty comparable, although Ghazni had we had like cement buildings with like little metal roofs as where we stayed and where the talk was and stuff. And on Meadowland we had tents with like a wood floor.
Mission-wise, how was it? Were you doing the same kinds of missions?
Same exact kinds of missions, and still at that point in the operation or in the conflict, Jalalabad was not a major logistics hub. Actually, my organic brigade at the end of our rotation made that into one. 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain really kind of brought that up to speed. But, so we would still have to drive back to Bagram from Meadowland. So we still did those supply runs, probably slightly less frequently. Once we went there, it was probably changed to once every 2 weeks instead of once every week, just because we had to go up through that mountain pass every time. That was like an 8-hour trip probably to get to Bagram. And again, though, because of not as many aircraft, a lot of our mail we would still pick up that way, other supplies, parts, etc. And so that was one of our major missions. Again, recovery, all kinds of recovery missions still. And then we also had to do resupply missions to our outposts. At that point, they were just literally built Najil, Kop Najil, which is, it's Najil. And that's the one that's to the northwest of Meadowland. And when we were there, we started it. We being actually the 102nd Infantry and their attached infantry platoon from 10th Mountain. And it was a vehicle patrol base at that point, which was like some concertina wire thrown out and some trucks in a perimeter. And it was the beginning of a base. I would use the term base loosely because it's still a COP at this point. It's still very, very rudimentary. But I actually contracted with this Afghan guy to get this metal water holder. It was like a tank thing, and contracted with him to build that for us. So we brought that up on one of our missions up there and emplaced that to hold water. A couple of my guys actually put together some little like outhouses and brought those up on a truck one of our trips, and they used like a half 55-gallon drum and then had a little outhouse. So built that up, and then we also had to do resupply runs the other way, which was to a place called Kalagoosh, and brought them supplies too. So we would bring supplies from Bagram to Meadowland, bulk resupply. Then we would break the supplies by location, keep some there, and then have what we needed to push forward to the other 2 locations, and then load up and do convoys out to them. So
how long were you at Meadowland?
Well, we were there from December, and we were supposed to go home in March. At that point, deployments were a year. And we packed up our stuff, and we had it all ready to go. And Colonel Gilbert called me into his office one night. I remember, it was like the beginning of March, and said, "Hey, you're going to be staying here. You 3rd Brigade got extended for 6 more months. And I remember I said, sir, that's not funny. Stop effing with me. Stop messing with me. And he's like, no, I'm serious. And I remember the Sergeant Major came in, Sergeant Major Grand, and I'm like, Sergeant Major, this is not a funny joke. Like, I just couldn't. I mean, we had been through a lot at that point, all these missions continuously. We've had incidents, people hurt, killed, etc. And we're like, you know what? It's not funny. It's not a funny joke. It took him like 5 times of telling me to realize that he was not joking and that we, in fact, weren't going home in like 2 weeks and we were going to be there for another few months.
And you had to tell your platoon that?
So, God, I remember I left his office.
Well, what year was that?
2007 now. Yeah, we moved in. Might as well buy land there. So I remember I came out and I was like, oh God, I felt sick to my stomach. I'm like, oh, because my guys were so excited to go. I was so close, And I went and I got my platoon sergeant and I pulled him outside and I'm like, oh, here's what's happening. And he's like, are you kidding me? Oh. So we both sit there for a little bit. I'm like, okay, we got to do this. So we called everyone in and told them, I'm like, you guys I remember what I said. I said, you guys have been doing a great job. Been doing so good that we're all staying another 5 months. And people had the same reaction. They were like, no, it's not funny. I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. And then I remember various reactions of people like, well, that's the way it goes. I remember some people stormed out, were throwing stuff around. A girl started crying. I mean, that's emotional. You think you're going to go home in 2 weeks, and there it is, shot in the gut. You're not leaving. Our brigade as a whole got extended 6 months because some people had already started the process of going home. But for us, we actually ended up staying only about, March, April, May, June. Most people only stayed about 4 more months by the time we ended up getting sent home.
How long did you end up staying?
I was there till the end of May because, what happened was, so the 102nd Infantry was done with their deployment by the end of April. And that's why I actually mentioned at the beginning that we brought them in, because then we drove them up and brought them out. See you later, guys. And there we were, still there, a little disheartening. But we dropped them off and they went back to a demob station. And at that point, our mission was over with them. So we went back to our brigade and went back to our regular chain of command, which was kind of a hard adjustment after we had been together doing something totally different from them this whole time. But we fell back in, and then quickly they made me the XO because of change in leadership in my Alpha company. And we went back to Salerno for like a minute, and then I was sent up to Bagram because I became the company XO and then took charge of the redeployment for my original Alpha Company 710th BSB. So what I did is I took charge of inventorying all of our property, packing all of our sensitive items, property, and then shipping all of our property out of country. And then I went home. I got to go home at the end of May, and the rest of our company followed on in June. My team went home in the end of May because we went with the property, with the sensitive items, and then received all of the equipment back at Fort Drum.
Alyssa, you had talked a little bit about the living conditions a minute ago, but let me go into that a little deeper. When you were out in the field, both at Meadowland and Ghazni, how did you stay in touch with your family?
A cell phone.
You had cell phone?
Yeah. We could buy a cell phone. We had like the little Nokia phone, like you showed me, a little Nokia phone, and you bought kind of the same to like what people have here for when it's like the pay as you go. You buy a card for minutes and you scratch it off and you type it in, and
you actually had cell phone service?
Yeah, there was cell phone service, spotty, but you had it. And then also, Connecticut actually has something really great where if I picked up in my office in Afghanistan, there's DSN phone, the internal military phone network. If I picked up that DSN phone and I called the DSN phone here in the 24-hour jack, then I could say, hey, can you please patch me through to an outside line? And here they could patch me through from the military network to my parents' home phone from here in this armory. And they could connect me to my parents' home line, and then I could talk to them that way too. And email. I mean, email was very up and down, but we had...
Where did you have access to internet?
So the Army has multiple types of satellites that they use to provide connectivity to the bases. JNN, VSAT, all these various satellites. And so we had, in my office tent, we had 2 computers to use for work, and 1 secret computer that obviously you can't email your family from or anything, but for, secret, like, mission data and stuff. But on those regular computers, you could use, like, my AKO Army email address, and I could email my parents and sister and whatever.
How frequently did you call home or use the internet email?
Well, I'm pretty close with my family, and I'm a big communicator, so I probably did it more than most. I talked to them a few times a week, probably. Email maybe once or twice a week, and call once or twice a week.
All right, so the food situation.
Yes.
Your soldiers were cooking, but did you have like a regular dining room?
Well, I think important things to mention about the food, too, is that people assume nowadays, because there's so much contracting with the military, and so many people have had experiences with Iraq, where soldiers don't really cook that much. People are surprised to learn that in Afghanistan, on both of my deployments, my soldiers cooked chow, and it was a shortage of 92 Golf, which is cook food service MOS soldiers throughout Afghanistan. They need them everywhere. All these little outposts, all of them, soldiers are cooking. So, that being said, oftentimes I believe that soldiers cooking is actually the best way to go, because it allows you a lot more flexibility, and they care about what they're doing oftentimes more, I think, than a contractor would, because they're cooking for you. It's their own people. So, we had dining room-ish. I mean, it was like a building in both locations, just another cement block building. At Metterlam, too, it was one of the only hard stand cement buildings there was the dining hall. Had a regular, like cheap, some kind of linoleum import floor or something, and wooden tables, stuff like that.
You have 3 meals a day?
Yep, usually. In Ghazni, at the beginning, like we were talking about the economy of force, sometimes, honestly, there were so few people that we would have to shut down the chow hall for a meal or two to put my cooks in the guard towers or on a mission or whatever. But in Metterlam, it was less so of that. And we usually had 3 meals a day. We actually had some cooks from other organizations that fell under us. Because at both locations and on both deployments, I and my people were in charge of the support overall in those locations where we were. So, so we, there were like a couple Navy cooks on the base that ended up working with my guys. So it was a neat experience. And there's always a few Afghans who, they pay as local workers who do like dishwashing and help prep stuff. And, they work there in the dining hall. And it was the UGR ration cycle, which, to someone who's not in the Army, there's different types of ration cycles, but what it boils down to is there's one ration cycle where you get, it's a 21-day ration cycle, where you have fresh augmentations, and that's usually at larger bases, like a Bagram, a Salerno, a Kandahar. And then on the smaller bases, you have UGRs, which are Unitized Group Ration is what it stands for, but it's packaged 50 soldier modules where a lot of it's boil and bag, but you can dress it up a little bit. And again, the Army cooks will try and dress it up, make this stir fried chicken actually into something else, add some sauce and pasta, and maybe make it into something else to try and, because with the Unitized Group Rations, you only have, you end up repeating the same meal about every 7 days. So it gets a little old. So you got to try and do something to mix it up a bit. Because there's like 14 lunch dinner meals. So you have one for lunch, one for dinner, and you end up repeating. And then on the first deployment as well, there was a little more leeway in I would go back and cook with them sometimes, which was motivational for me, and I hope for them too. And there were a couple other officers and NCOs from the 102nd who we enjoyed going back and mixing it up with the cooks and cooking and serving once in a while. And we could sometimes bring in fruits and vegetables that people would get in the market while out on mission. And you can't serve those on the line, but we could, after the dining hall closed, go in and maybe say, okay, here's this chicken left over, and I got this eggplant out in the market, make something, So that was kind of a little motivator for us and the guys. And the cooks did a great job. Most thankless job in the Army right there is the cooks. Work long hours.
Did you have shortages of food ever, or shortages of any of the other supplies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not to the point where you didn't eat, but I remember there was a period in time where we probably ate the same thing 6 days in a row because nothing else was coming, and we were lower on the priority list. So we would put our order in and we would get a little bit of what we asked for and all kinds of this other stuff that we didn't ask for. And, so nobody ever went to the point where they went hungry, but it was definitely, you didn't want to be eating the same, chicken cream, some nastiness every day for 6 days. Something else that, the two supplies that are absolutely critical and sometimes fall subject to shortage would be ammunition and fuel. On both deployments, primarily in the Medellin area, we had shortages of those for various reasons. I want to say, hopefully, that it was never due to my poor ordering. But sometimes it's things outside of your control, like with the fuel, especially the fuel in Afghanistan, all comes in trucks, and all those trucks flow through Torkham Gate, which is at the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So if there are different political things going on in that area and at that gate, the enemy knows, Pakistani government knows, the Afghan government knows that's a choke point for us, for the military there. So if they close that gate off 5, 7, 10 days, it might not seem like a lot when we think about, oh, that's our bait, our little fob, and we can wait 5 days for fuel. Hopefully, if we're doing good forecasting. But what happens is the places that push the fuel to us don't get their resupply. And then they have to start to ration. And it's a whole, multiple order effect where it did get to the point a few times on both deployments where we had to say, okay, we have to really define out and ration out what missions we're going to have, what are absolutely essential missions, because we don't have the fuel to just keep running and running and running. Remember, all these FOBs are powered by generators, which use the same fuel. And it's not like, they got power lines running to them or anything. So, and all the heaters and everything is powered by the same fuel. So, that's a hot commodity. And when it gets closed off, that could be an issue. Or if you get a leak in your fuel bag, it could be an issue. The second deployment, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little more, but fuel became an issue sometimes because we were in charge of the fuel I was in charge of the fuel at 5 locations. And a couple of them, there were some accounting errors, and there were also some resupply issues with the fuel. So again, we had to kind of ration out the usage of fuel. And then ammo, that's pretty self-explanatory. If something happens where you end up using a lot of it, and there's always certain types of ammo that are at a shortage in country anyway. Different mortar rounds or howitzer rounds are sometimes, I don't want to say hard to come by, but they're controlled more in that everybody's wanting to expend them, so you just don't get what you want. Sometimes you get what you need usually, but you might not get what you want. So, and pushing ammo was always, one of those things that was an emergency in some cases, so you had to prioritize that and proactively. That's why I enjoyed being a logistics officer so much, because I enjoyed that forecasting.
On both Ghazni and Madalam, what were your barracks like? Where did you sleep?
We talked about that a little bit with in Ghazni and Madalam. It was similar in that we had individual areas, in that we put up some like plywood half walls, kind of, maybe like 6 feet tall.
But in Ghazni, you had the
cement building. It was like a big. It was a cement building where maybe like 12 soldiers had little individual rooms. And then when we went to Madalam, we elected not to put up the walls, because by that, I mean, what the heck, by that time we're been together so long anyway that it's like, whatever, we'll just be in this tent.
Did the officers have separate sleeping quarters? Did you sleep with your
soldiers? I slept with my female soldiers. I didn't. That served two purposes. One is there were really no other female officers there, so there wasn't really an option. And then two is that I also wanted to have an eye on them. So, so it served two purposes. And it wasn't a big deal to me. On the second deployment, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, but the living conditions were slightly different, although not very much so. But
now in Madalam, you had those same cement buildings?
We had tents.
Oh, so you had
So it was like the tent, like the kind of tent you see that can house 12 soldiers, plastic tent, and then they actually put up a little bit of plywood on the wall on the side to make a better wall. And then plywood floor.
Wow. And you had mentioned at one place you had contracted out to have those little outhouses made. Did you have facilities at both of your forward operating? Yeah, there was contracted little trailers at one of them, where it was like a half shower, half bathroom with sinks. So that was actually pretty nice compared to what we could have. Although I remember at Ghazni, we had this burned toilet still. There was burned toilets on the first deployment, various places, which I actually preferred because it was the only place for privacy. So it was a one single person outhouse, burned toilet. Nobody's bothering you for 5 minutes. You could just be in there. And we had it as a female burned toilet. We had a lock on it. And there was us and the female medics. And we each had a key. And we had it hanging up in our little areas. And we would go have 5 minutes of peace in there.